Okay, so the last chapter we read, the Mr. Bellingham came and he and his soldiers looked through all of the Lockton's possessions in their house, and they took all the lead in the windows and the window frames to use for ammunition, which didn't make the Locktons very happy. But also, Mr. Lockton ended up getting arrested. Um, and so Mrs. Lockton is not happy, and at the end of the last chapter, she fainted from all of the anxiety. Okay, we're still on Friday, June 7th. Becky sent me to fetch the Lady Seymour to help Madam get through having her husband arrested like that. The old lady lived 2 blocks north of Trinity Church, the one with spires that scraped the sky. It's one of them old Dutch-style houses. Got a red door and a knocker that looks like a heart, Becky said. You can't miss it. The house was not far from City Hall, along a street where soldiers with heavy axes were chopping down the row of tall poplar trees. Fortifications, a soldier explained to a cartman, to protect against the invasion. Any day now, they say. The red door made the house easy to find. I walked through a beautiful garden around to the back. Neatly trimmed boxwood hedges created a path lined with young botany plants, lavender, daylilies, and honeysuckle. Mamma would have admired the roses. My fingers itched to pluck up the scraggly weeds that were crowding them, but I dared not. I knocked at the door. The door was opened by the whitest girl I had ever seen. Her skin was pale as water, except for 2 flame-colored spots on her cheeks. Her eyebrows and eyelashes were near invisible, and her eyes a mix of pewter and blue. She wiped her hands on her apron and said something I did not understand. I've come for the Lady Seymour, I explained. Madame Lockton requires her presence. She frowned. What wilt you? What did you say? I asked. In Augenblick blief, she said, before she closed the door in my face. What was Augenblick? New York was stranger every passing day. I knocked again, but there was no answer. I was about to walk home when I heard Lady Seymour's voice through an open window. A moment later, the door opened, and Lady Seymour stood there in the kitchen. I curtsied, proper-like. Pardon, ma'am, but they've arrested the master, and madam is poorly. She nodded. They've been hunting loyalists all day. I told Anne it would come to this. Come inside, child. Isabel, is it not? The kitchen was larger than the Locktons, with a tiled hearth and copper pots hanging on the wall. A smoke-colored cat curled itself around my ankles, its tail in the shape of a question mark. Please, sit down. You must be hungry. I perched on the edge of a chair. Lady Seymour poured me a mug of fresh milk. My surprise at having a proper lady do so must have shown on my face. You could use some building up, she said, as she pushed a plate of molasses cookies to me. Eat, and tell me everything. She turned to her servant, who stood by the hearth. Will Jess Albelbliff even de meubels afet folly? I probably didn't say that right. The strange girl bobbed once and left the room, the pale pink ribbons from the back of her cap trailing behind her. She speaks only Dutch, Lady Seymour explained, and she shows no inclinations to learn English, I'm afraid. Now a bite, and then the events. I chewed the cookie quickly, took a sip of milk, and recounted near everything, though I neglected to mention my role as a household spy. She listened carefully as I spoke and asked plenty of questions. Did Elihu say anything to the men who arrested him? Did he give them any names? Not in my hearing, ma'am. And she sat back in her chair. He is in no danger as long as he stays silent. She broke off a piece of cookie, popped it into her mouth, and chewed. I imagine Anne is in a lather, meaning she's gotten herself all upset about it. Yes, ma'am, I said carefully. She told Becky to pack the trunks for Charleston. Lady Seymour shook her head. I don't blame her, but fleeing would ensure that the rebels would take everything. Yes, ma'am, I mumbled. I took an overly large bite of the cookie, certain she would send me back straight away. She tapped her forefinger on the table as she pondered, her rings flashing in the light. Right, she said firmly, having come to a decision. I will write a note for you to take to the lawyer's office before you go home, and another for Anne, telling her that Elihu will be soon set free. The Dutch girl came back in the kitchen and said something I could not make out at all. Lady Seymour rose from her chair and motioned for me to stay seated. Finish those cookies, please, and drink a second glass of milk. You can't run errands for me unless you're properly nourished. Oh, what are we thinking about Lady Seymour? Sounds like someone I'd like to be friends with, giving out all those cookies. Okay, we're going to see if we can get through chapter 13, maybe. We're still Friday, and now we're moving into Saturday. The front door opened the next morning as I walked down the stairs carrying Madam's chamber pot. It was Master Lockton, back from being arrested. His clothing was rumpled, and he looked as if he had not slept. He paused when he saw me. Tell Becky I require strong coffee and food. Where is your mistress, and what is she doing? Above, sir. I gripped the handle of the chamber pot tightly. Packing. He stormed past me, bellowing for his wife. As I dumped and washed out the chamber pot, I gave thanks. 'Twas clear he did not think me as a spy. When I went back inside, there came a ruckus and much shouting from the second floor. I joined Ruth and Becky at the foot of the staircase, the three of us listening with big ears as Lockton and Madam shouted at each other. Shh, Ruth said, putting her finger to her lips. That's right, little one, said Becky. They don't pipe down soon, the whole neighborhood will turn to watch. Crash! Bet you that was the wash pitcher, said Becky. Crash! And the basin, she added. Do they often fight like this, I asked. Often enough, Becky said. She stopped as Madam cried out in pain. The master likes to be obeyed. He's not happy she wants to head for Charleston, and she don't want to stay here. Lockton lowered his voice some, but he was still angry and scolding. Should we do something, I asked. Perhaps Lady Seymour could calm him down. Becky shook her head. 'Twould fire him up even more. Best not to discuss these things. Ruth stuck her thumb in her mouth. Once the fighting had ended, and the master had been served his meals, I took a cool compress and a mug of cold ale up to Madam. As she applied the compress to her swollen split lip, she scolded me for not scraping candle wax that had dripped on the floor. It caused me to fall, she said. Do you see what your clumsiness has cost me? We both knew it was a lie. There was no wax on the floor. A few drops of blood stained the edge of the carpet. What do you have to say for yourself? She asked. I didn't like picking up the blame and carrying it, but I had no choice. I bowed my head. I beg forgiveness, ma'am, and promise it will not happen again. She removed the compress and winced. It had better not. So she's blaming her getting punched by Mr. Lockton on Isabel. In the weeks that followed, the master had me serve him whenever his companions visited. I listened closely to their conversations, but they blew only hot air, complaining about the Congress and the weather and the effect of war on business. I was relieved to hear that the printer, ink-stained, had fled the city with his wife and children. Lockton was certain that he had told the rebels about the money and the plan to bribe the American troops. My secret was safe. Becky brought back peas, greens, and gossip from the marketplace. The British fleet was in the harbor. No, the fleet had sailed for Jamaica. No, the Congress had negotiated a peace. No, the British planned to kill us all while we slept. So she's getting all these stories, some true, some maybe not true. Gossip is the foul smell from the devil's backside. That's what Mama always said. I tried to ignore the wild stories and stay alert for something, anything that I might use to secure us freedom. Becky had been quite happy to give me the chore of hiking up to the tea-water pump every day. After my first few visits, it became the favorite part of my day. The pump was set in a little shed at the edge of the common, a big gathering place ringed by army barracks, the poorhouse, and the jail. There were trees and fields to the north of the common, and the burying place for Africans. The air was cleaner up there, easier to breathe. A week after Lockton returned home, Curzon stood with me in the line of servants waiting for water. I was desperate to ask him questions, but knew they had to wait until we were alone. When my turn came, I handed my buckets to the ancient slave who worked the pump handle, a man old as dirt, with stone-gray hair and skin the color of the night sky. He carried a country mark on his face, 3 straight lines that had been cut into his right cheek when he became a man in Africa. Papa had a mark that looked close to it. It made me feel kin to the old man, and I smiled and curtsied polite whenever I saw him. "Thank you, grandfather," Curzon said to the man as he handed us the full buckets. I was surprised. "Is he your grandfather? I didn't know that." The old man chuckled softly and reached for the buckets of the girl standing behind me. "I'm the grandfather of everybody and everything." He pushed down on the handle of the pump and water flowed. "Mind how you go, missy." Curzon waited until we were 2 blocks down Queen Street before he asked me about the Locktons' affairs. He traveled to Fairfield in Connecticut 2 days ago and came home late last night, I said. "I thought he was on a parole, that he had to stay in New York. Why don't they arrest him?" Curzon looked behind us and from side to side before answering. "They don't have enough men to follow him," he explained, "and his aunt has powerful connections, both here and in England. There must be solid proof before they dare arrest him again. Should you ever come in possession of letters sent to him, or maps, or if I find the king hiding in our pantry," I interrupted. "The Congress would give you a medal for that," Curzon said with a grin. "I would rather have passage home on a fast ship." "You don't want to sail anywhere, not now," he said, doffing his hat and bowing to 3 officers passing on horseback. I likewise bobbed in the direction of the gentlemen and waited for them to draw out of earshot before speaking again. "Why not? Why don't I want to set sail?" "The royal fleet is fast approaching and is eager for battle and spoils," meaning deaths. "If you sailed now, you'd likely be captured and sold to the islands." "Idle gossip and pipe smoke," I said. "You hear it on every street corner. It's a wonder we don't all choke to death on it." "When you see smoke, you find fire, country. Don't worry, the day of our liberty will soon dawn. This country is going to be free, and you and me with it." "For a boy with a little head, you sure do have big dreams. I just want what's owed me," said Isabel. "You need to be patient," he said with a frown. "The army has bigger fish to fry than you and your sister." "And I have bigger fish to fry than your army," I said with a whole lot more confidence than I truly felt. Let's see, maybe we can get this. The sun set later and later in those weeks. The extra light was welcome and put to good use. I aired out our pallet and blanket and tidied up our cellar corner. The potato bin was near empty, and Ruth asked to play in it as if it was a little house. I would not let her. Instead, I made her a corn husk doll, painting a face on it with pokeberry juice and fashioning a gown for it with a piece of cambric from Becky's scrap bag. One night, feeling out of sorts and reckless, I crept up the stairs. It was after midnight, and Lockton and his wife slept heavily. I snuck into the library and took a book from the shelves, a story called Robinson Crusoe by Mr. Defoe. I sat by the glowing coals in the kitchen hearth, and I read it until I could hold my eyes open no longer. When the fat moon rose the next day, I planted the mystery seeds I had taken from Mama's jar. I did not know what they would grow into, but planting them deep in the cool dirt was a comfort. Thunder boomed in the distance as a summer storm approached. I ought to check the cows, I thought. Storms made them nervous. More thunder rolled, and then a third wave. Fool, I scolded myself. The cows were in our old life, not our new life. The moon climbed higher, and the air returned to stillness and waiting. I took myself to bed and did not dream. Okay, so she's getting a little braver and bolder moving around the Locktons' house at night. But she got herself a book, so that's a good thing. Okay.